Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on a book that really flips the script on how we think about, well, insecurity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's called The Wisdom of Insecurity by Alan Watts.
Interesting title.
Right. Watts was this fascinating philosopher and spiritual explorer, kind of a bridge between Eastern and Western thought.
Okay, so what's the wisdom in insecurity?
That's the big question. He starts by saying, anxiety, it's not a new thing. Suffering and change, they're like built into the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
But what's different now?
Watts says it's what's making us anxious.
Hmm.
We've shifted, he says, from these traditional beliefs, like faith in God or eternal laws,
Right.
to putting more faith in scientific authority.
Okay, but hasn't science made our lives better in many ways?
Absolutely. But Watts's point is that shift has left a lot of people feeling unmoored, like there's no solid ground for meaning anymore.
Kind of like we traded a comforting story for a cold, hard truth.
Exactly. And now we're not quite sure what to do with it.
Makes sense.
So Watts warns against two reactions he sees happening: clinging to those old myths even when they don't fit anymore,
Mm-hmm.
or frantically trying to build new myths, new systems out of fear, whether it's political or economic.
Oh, I see. So like new ideologies to cling to.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
he has this great analogy for why neither of those really works.
Oh, I like the good analogy.
Imagine trying to mail a package of water.
Okay.
You can't contain it. It just slips through your fingers.
Right.
That's what it's like, he says, to cling to a fixed sense of reality in a world that's always changing.
You're always going to have wet hands.
Pretty much.
But
So that's where Watts' central argument comes in.
lay it on me.
He says this feeling of a separate I, like struggling against the world, that is the root of insecurity.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah.
We all feel that I sometimes.
Right. And we get so obsessed with time, regretting the past, worrying about the future.
All the time.
And that disconnects us from the only reality we actually experience this present moment.
So it's not just that the world is uncertain, but that our way of experiencing it makes it a battle.
Exactly. Watts says this craving for permanence, for security, in a universe that is constantly changing, that sets us up for a fight we can't win.
Yeah, it's like wanting to make a river stand still.
Perfect analogy. So the question becomes, how do we stop fighting the river? Watts seems to be suggesting we need a whole different perspective.
I'm ready for it. What does he say?
Instead of seeing the universe as a bunch of separate, static things, right?
Yeah, that's how we usually think about it, I guess.
He says, imagine it as a unified flowing process, like a river. We create this false sense of isolated objects with our language, our nouns and definitions and all that.
Interesting.
But reality is much more dynamic and interconnected than that.
It's funny, right? It's like how we describe motion.
What do you mean?
By breaking it down into still frames.
Right.
You lose the actual feeling of flow, the essence of the movement itself.
That's such a great point. And Watts even uses the word God to represent this, undefinable, ever-changing process. But he's very clear it's not about, belief. It's about directly experiencing this interconnected reality.
Makes sense.
So if our minds are creating this illusion of separation, this me versus the world thing,
Where do we go for a more accurate view?
well, Watts suggests something that might surprise you.
I'm intrigued.
Our own bodies. He says our bodies possess this innate wisdom, this deeper knowing
Okay.
that we've kind of neglected in favor of intellectual solutions.
So less thinking, more feeling. Or something like that.
Kind of. He uses the example of childbirth. A primitive woman giving birth naturally, she's in tune with her body's wisdom.
Right.
But he says the modern, very medicalized experience of childbirth, it often misses that connection.
That makes sense. It's more like a procedure now.
Right. And Watts isn't saying we need to go back in time,
Yeah.
but, he's saying we've lost touch with a vital source of wisdom. It's funny he was echoing what some scientists were saying even back then. He mentions these guys, White and Burrow,
Uh-huh.
and they talked about this split between the brain and the body as a modern ailment.
Like we're too in our heads.
Exactly. And that disconnect, Watts argues, leads to a lot of frustration
Oh, how that...
because we end up just seeking pleasure driven by our minds.
Okay.
But it leads to this endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction.
I see. You get what you want, but then you want something else.
It's a powerful point, right? Think about it. Sensory overload, consumerism, working jobs we dislike just to buy things that promise this fleeting happiness.
Yeah, that's most of modern life, isn't it?
Watts is pointing out this vicious circle we get trapped in.
So where do we go from this vicious circle?
Well, Watts' solution might seem, kind of radical at first.
Yeah.
He says the key is to really truly embrace the present moment.
Fully embrace it, huh?
Yeah, like completely. And I know, I can already hear some listeners saying, easier said than done.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Our whole culture is built around future goals,
Yeah.
planning, achieving, always striving for that next thing.
That's exactly it. It's like we've been programmed to believe that happiness is always just around the corner.
If I just get that promotion,
Right. Or buy that house.
achieve that perfect. Yeah, whatever.
Exactly. But Watts argues that this future focus, it actually prevents us from experiencing the present moment. The only place where life is actually really happening.
We're so busy chasing the future, we miss what's right in front of us.
And it's not just like a time management problem. Watts says even our language reinforces this illusion of a separate self moving through time.
What do you mean?
Think about it. We say things like, I had a good time, or I'm going to have a great weekend.
Right.
But it's like that I is separate from time.
It's like we're always outside our lives watching them go by.
Yes, instead of being in them. And Watts says this detachment, this constant looking ahead,
It leads to suffering.
it's a major source of suffering, he says. Because we're so focused on what we don't have, on what we're striving for,
How we miss the good stuff.
that we miss out on the richness and fullness of what's already present.
It's that whole grass is greener thing.
Totally. Always looking for something better. So
Yeah.
Watts is like, hey, question this whole way of thinking,
I like him already.
Instead of seeking security by clinging to the past or grasping at the future,
Yeah.
he says we can find true peace by surrendering to the present moment.
Okay, sounds great, but how?
Right. It's one thing to say it, but, our minds are constantly pulling us away from the present.
Oh, yeah. Worries, regrets.
All of it. So this is where the practice of awareness comes in. And Watts really emphasizes it's not about emptying your mind.
Not about zoning out.
Nope. And it's not about achieving some, blissful state.
Okay, so what is it about?
It's about paying attention to what's happening right now without judgment, without resistance.
That sounds hard.
It is. He uses this great metaphor, though. Imagine a mirror reflecting whatever's placed in front of it.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The mind, he says, is like that mirror. It simply reflects our experience.
I like that.
And it's when we try to control or manipulate what the mind is reflecting.
That's when we get into trouble.
That's when we suffer, because we start to identify with our thoughts, our feelings. And that creates a sense of separation from, the flow of experience.
I see what you mean. It's like getting attached to a specific reflection in the mirror.
Yes. Instead of letting the reflections come and go naturally. And Watts says, this clinging.
It's the source of suffering.
That's what creates suffering. When we let go of the need to control our experience, that's when we open ourselves up to a whole new way of being.
Okay, I'm with you so far. So we stop fighting, stop trying to control everything.
We step into the eye of the storm, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. There's a sense of stillness, a sense of peace.
Exactly. And this doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. Watts argues that true awareness actually leads to more compassionate, more effective action.
Because you're not operating from a place of fear.
Yes. We're not coming from a place of lack. We can respond to situations with more clarity, more wisdom.
This is starting to sound a lot like morality.
Oh, you're right. And that's where things get really interesting, because Watts' ideas about morality, they were pretty revolutionary for his time.
Okay, lay it on me. He wasn't a fan of the rule-following approach, was he?
Not exactly. He challenges the idea that morality is some set of rules imposed from the outside.
I see.
He says true morality, it comes from within.
From a deeper understanding.
Yeah, a deep understanding of our interconnection with everything.
That makes sense. So not just being good out of obligation.
Right. Or fear of punishment. Watts points out that trying to be virtuous out of duty, it's kind of futile in the end, because it's still based on that illusion of a separate self, trying to control its actions.
Ah, right. Trying to be someone you're not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that kind of morality, it can lead to a lot of hypocrisy, self-righteousness. We end up judging ourselves and others based on these external standards.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Instead of acting from genuine compassion. So if true morality isn't about following rules, where does it come from? What's the alternative?
That's the big question, right?
Watts suggests true morality arises from a state of wholeness, from recognizing that we're already part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
That interconnectedness again.
It's about aligning ourselves with, like, the natural flow of life, you know?
Yeah, I'm starting to see it. Not checking off boxes on some moral checklist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He uses this beautiful metaphor here. Imagine a tree growing naturally towards the sun. It doesn't need to be told how to grow.
Right.
It just unfolds according to its own inner nature.
So are we like the tree?
He's saying we have this innate capacity for goodness, compassion.
We're already good.
It's already there, like that tree reaching for sunlight. But we lose sight of that when we get caught up in our selfish desires, our fears.
So how do we get back to that?
That's the journey, right? Watts challenges us to let go of that illusion of a separate self and to embrace the reality that we're all interconnected.
It all ties back to that insecurity, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's like he's saying our insecurity ultimately comes from this sense of separation.
We think we're isolated, alone,
Like we're struggling against this hostile world.
always on guard, always trying to protect ourselves.
And that creates this chronic tension, right?
Anxiety, fear.
Yes, but when we recognize that we're not separate, that we're part of this larger interconnected web of life,
A sense of peace arises.
it's like realizing we've always been held and supported, even when we didn't know it. And this realization can transform our relationship with insecurity instead of fearing it.
We can see it as an opportunity.
An opportunity for growth, for awakening, like a doorway into a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So we're not overcoming insecurity, we're,
Embracing it.
embracing it.
And that's where Watts' message becomes truly liberating.
How so?
He's not giving us these rules or techniques to overcome insecurity.
Okay.
He's inviting us to step into a whole new way of seeing and experiencing reality.
This is powerful stuff.
A way of being that's grounded in the present moment, free from all those self-imposed boundaries.
But there's more to this, isn't there?
There's so much more. Let's continue exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
You know, it's really amazing how Watts brings it all together.
I know, right?
Insecurity, the present moment,
Even morality.
religion.
It's all connected.
It's like he's creating this whole new map of reality.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate is he's not being preachy about it.
No, not at all.
It's more like, hey, here's some ideas. Try them out. See what works for you.
He's not asking us to believe anything blindly, just encouraging us to, think for ourselves, question our assumptions.
Be open to new possibilities.
That's what makes his work so powerful. He's not giving us the answers.
More like pointing us in a direction.
Exactly. An invitation to this journey of self-discovery. He's like a guide,
Showing us the path.
But ultimately, we have to take the steps.
And it's not about reaching some perfect state of being, is it?
No. It's about embracing the messiness of life, the unpredictability, the insecurity even.
He's saying those attempts to control everything, to escape reality.
That's what creates suffering,
It's in letting go, in surrendering.
that we find true peace, freedom.
And that surrender isn't about giving up.
It's not passive. It's more like recognizing that we're already part of something much bigger than ourselves.
That interconnected web of life again.
Exactly. And it's like we can finally relax, stop fighting the current,
Go with the flow.
Yes. And in that flow, we discover this sense of belonging, like being at home in the universe.
Even with all the uncertainty.
Even amidst all the impermanence, it's like we can finally exhale and say,
Right.
yes, this is it. This is life.
It's enough.
It's enough. And that acceptance, that deep sense of isness, that's the foundation of what Watts calls creative morality.
So again, it's not about following rules.
It's about acting from a place of wholeness, interconnectedness. He says, when we see ourselves as part of this larger web of life,
Our actions change.
our actions naturally become more compassionate, more harmonious.
More in tune with the good of the whole.
Yes. Like our well-being becomes inseparable from the well-being of others, the well-being of the world around us.
Wow. Okay, so if we're not striving for some future happiness or perfection, what's the point? What are we aiming for?
Watts would say life isn't about getting somewhere. It's about being fully present in the journey itself.
Makes sense.
Like we're all on this grand adventure, and the destination isn't as important as the experiences we have along the way.
I love that. He uses the metaphor of a dance.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
We're not dancing to reach a certain spot on the floor.
Right.
We're dancing for the joy of movement, the connection with the music, our partners.
So life is a dance to be savored, a symphony to be experienced fully in each moment.
Beautifully put. This has been a really incredible deep dive.
I agree. Watts's insights are so rich, so multifaceted.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Me too.
Yeah.
And, I think his message is more relevant now than ever with all the anxiety and uncertainty in the world right now.
Absolutely. He reminds us that true security,
It's not about external
it's
circumstance
an
now.
inner state of being.
It's in the present moment,
Yeah.
in the awareness of our interconnectedness,
That we find a peace that can't be shaken.
peace that can't be shaken.